I really want you to like me. I've thought a lot about what I would wear today, whether I should wear my glasses. Do they make me look smart? How much makeup is too much makeup? I've worried if it's anti-feminist to worry about those things. I've thought about every embarrassing thing that I've ever done. And every time I've ever been quoted, not quite saying what I wanted to say. And I have obsessed over those things in my mind, trying to find the lesson to make sure that they would never happen again. I've thought about how this is being live streamed, and how if I do something embarrassing, before I even walk off stage, it could be screenshotted and tweeted, but worst of all, discussed in group chats that I'm not in. I've thought about how I feel helpless to the scale of the internet and social media and the lack of privacy I seem to have welcomed into my life. I've thought about how there are at least 3 people who I went on Tinder dates with and never spoke to again, who still watch my Instagram stories. And I wonder if they're watching this. I have thought that if I think hard enough about all of these things and work hard enough to find the answers to all of them, then I can somehow seize back a sense of control over my own narrative and how I'm perceived by you. And I thought about all of these things within about a minute of being asked to give this talk. Why am I like this? Well, it could just be me. I've had a little bit of an unusual life so far. So when I was 18, I moved here to Sydney with the plan to have a grown-up life. I got a full-time retail job for the first time, I got a cockroach-filled room in Newtown, and I was going to go to the University of Sydney, get an arts degree, become something noble and wise like an art teacher. And then, 6 months later, I dropped out of uni and I broke up with my boyfriend and I quit my job and I moved out of my house. With a plan to become internet famous. My parents were thrilled, I'm sure. So, why? I was doing fine at my job, I was doing fine at uni, if not at peace with the cockroaches, I'd become very quick on the draw with the bug spray, but I felt this sense of emptiness and unfulfillment in my life. There was one thing that did make me feel good. The internet. Now, 2011 was a very different time. But not the whole internet, one very specific part of it, and that was cosplaying on Facebook. Did not expect a cheer for that. So cosplay was very important to me, a giant nerd, and being a weird and awkward teenager, I got super, super into it. So this is me in high school, not long enough ago. And I feel like the Australian flag in the background really just ties it together. So I did this a lot. I was making costumes and dressing up, going to conventions and doing photo shoots under this cosplay persona, Eve Beauregard, don't ask. And I was really enjoying it and started to gain some traction. So a couple of these photo shoots went viral, and that's when I had my FILDI moment. And I decided to make it my job. So why still? So at the time, no amount of throwing myself into my studies or selling heaps of perfume at Priceline could make me feel as good as sharing a new costume or a new photo shoot with a group of people who loved the same things that I did. It felt like this community really believed that I could do anything that I set my mind to. So eventually, after many, many photo shoots and learning all about social media and community management, many glue gun burns and all-nighters later, I eventually started to get jobs in the games industry, working for games companies. So I would travel to conventions and I would spend 8 hours a day on my feet, sometimes up to 5 days at a time, in big high heels and corsets and wigs and makeup and all kinds of forms of torture. And I would talk to people about video games all day, which upon reflection does sound like hell. But at the time, was very energizing and an amazing experience. Because I was traveling the world, finding these pockets of acceptance. And what I was feeling was validation. But that feeling didn't last forever. So before too long, I found it harder and harder to keep up with the same level of output and emotional investment. The thought of doing an all-nighter to hit a crazy deadline was no longer exciting to me. I dreaded doing the work. I was holding myself hostage with ridiculously high expectations. And then because of that, I started to resent the people around me. And then ultimately, I blamed myself. I said, you've done this to yourself, you've worked too hard and you can't keep up and you're burnt out. And I was right about one thing. I was burnt out. Now, what I wasn't thinking about was, which part of that are you laughing at? This was really bad. What I wasn't thinking about was the more toxic parts of the cosplay world. So, being a cosplayer online comes with a lot of misogynistic trolling and dick pics and worse. And then in person, harassment, catcalling, groping. And as I was doing more work in that space, these things were happening more. But I wasn't seeing a correlation between having those experiences and wanting to quit, which seems weird. But at the time, I got really lucky because my love of these communities eventually led to jobs in community management, which then led to jobs in marketing, which then led to jobs in video game production. So then before too long, I was making video games. At 24 years old, I was the game runner on my very own video game that I loved so much. But the same cycle played out. I fell in love with video games and video game development, but turns out the games industry is actually really hard. In many ways, I think the games industry combines a lot of the difficult things that young people face entering the workforce, but all at once and forever. So there's a high expectation of unpaid work, whether it's through internships or crunch. It's a rapidly changing space, it's highly competitive, and we have a long way to go when it comes to equality. So the inclination of game developers to be overworked is not a reflection of us as people, but of the space that we operate in. And I was no exception. I wanted to tick every single box that a person can tick so that I could be one of the special people who got to wake up every day and make video games. I thought if I worked hard enough and long enough, then I would be one of the people the industry didn't chew up and spit out. But again, I got lucky. Around this time, the games industry started to have really open and transparent conversations about the symptoms of burnout and how they affect us personally and professionally. So stuff like emotional exhaustion, difficulty concentrating, anxiety, pessimism, apathy. Prior to learning that this is what burnout was, I would have described that as a Wednesday. But now that I knew this, when I started to burn out in games, I didn't blame myself. There's a quote from a BuzzFeed article about millennial burnout that I really like. So it says, "I never thought the system was equitable. I knew it was winnable only for a small few. I just believed I could continue to optimize myself to become one of them." I looked around me and I saw no other women in my company. I looked through the glass door of the boardroom and saw that I hadn't been offered my seat at the table. I saw that no amount of burning myself out and trying to forge myself into the perfect worker had changed the systemic problem at the core of my industry. I was throwing myself into a meat grinder, hoping that it would treat me differently to the rest of the meat. Now, maybe I love games more than I loved cosplay. Or maybe I'm just older and more stubborn. Or maybe the glue gun fumes affected me in some kind of way. But I decided to do something about it. So that's why I created the Working Lunch with the manageable goal of changing the world. So the Working Lunch is a social enterprise that offers mentorship and professional development opportunities for underrepresented people in the games industry. So we take people who are constantly outnumbered and underserved, and we provide them with skills and resources and tools and contacts to help them navigate those first couple of years where so many of us burn out and drop off. I looked around me and I saw, my problems are real and they suck, but I also have an enormous amount of privilege compared to a lot of my peers. And there's a sense of responsibility for how you should use that. So I took my contacts and my resources from my cosplay career and my games career to get sponsors and partners and mentors and executives all in the right room to talk to each other to make games a better place. So my big learning from all of this: I know how it feels to be the only person like you in a classroom or a boardroom or a lunchroom. And I know that no amount of burning yourself out changes anything without changing the people around you and the people who make decisions that affect all of us. So the learning is, the cure for millennial burnout is not a better you, it's a better world. And I hope you all stick around to make one.